Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very, very accomplished and senior corporate leader from Cincinnati, USA, Mr. Tony Saldanha. Tony, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, Ashutosh.
Thank you. Tony is the president, Transformant. He's also an author, and all of you know I'm very partial to authors. He's the co-author of a book titled Revolutionizing Business Operations, and we'll talk about his book. He's the CEO and co-founder of Inixia, which is a global standards and certification body for the shared services industry. He's run Procter & Gamble's famed multi-billion-dollar GBS and IT operations in every region across the world during a 27-year career. And in 2013, he was named Computer World's Premier 100 IT Professionals. So, Tony, before we get into Transformant and Inixia, tell me a little bit about your own amazing journey in brief.
Oh, I think I was just lucky to be in the right place at the right time. I kind of grew up with the IT and shared services industry. I worked prior to Procter & Gamble in the US for a few years with Unisys Corporation.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, joined Procter & Gamble in Asia. And over a 27-year career there, had the fortune of, helping start up the first ever shared services, offshore services in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
I was program leader of one of the, probably the single largest outsourcing deal, which is a 10-year, $8 billion deal between P&G and HP. And then, of course, running operations. So it's been a fantastic career. And I loved every minute of it.
I'm sure. So let's now talk about Transformant and Inixia, which are in the digital and shared services business. Can you give our listeners an overview of what shared services mean in today's business context?
Oh, that's a great question, Ashutosh. So, I'm sure your listeners are aware of, companies like Tata and Infosys that run back offices, right? So whether it is, accounting or HR transactions or IT transactions. In fact, this is an industry in its own right. In India, one of the fastest growing industries globally. So what most companies do is, in order to drive efficiency and cost reductions in operations, they take some of this common work, and instead of doing it in different departments in different countries, they sweep it together, create an organization which is variously called shared services or global business services. And then, that organization can figure out sourcing strategies, whether to do the work, in-house or then outsource it. But that's been the history of shared services over the past 30, 40 years. The interesting fact is that this particular organization for most companies has now been identified as the #1 enabler of digital transformation for most companies. Because, these are people that know technology, they know the internal work processes, and they know change management.
Right.
And so instead of bringing in a McKinsey or a Bain or, somebody else to drive transformation, why would you not employ this organization as transformation agents inside the company? So it's been a very evolving industry, and therefore a great area to focus on.
Amazing. And what would you say are the top 3 trends that you see shaping this particular industry over the next few years?
Of course, the rise of technology, whether it's artificial intelligence and, so on and so forth. So, I think that's #1 trend. The second trend is, what I call reimagining work processes. And I'll give you an example of that, including actually of both of those trends. So let's take something as mundane as travel and expense reports, right? So, you and I travel, let's say from, Delhi to New York, and then we end up having to fill in our expenses in that report. Most companies do that. And if you want to make that efficient, then of course, you might automate it or have people offshore to look at transactions versus credit cards and stuff like that. Now, let's reimagine that. At the end of the day, travel and expenses and travel and expense reports are in support of having to go from point A to point B for meetings or some purposes, right? That's not a core business in itself for any company, whether it's Procter and Gamble or anybody else. So can we do that using data differently? And that's exactly what Google and Adobe and others do. So what they might do is say, all right, Ashutosh, you want to travel from New York to London, go online to the system, which has all data of all potential, permutations and combinations of travel. And then you put in your itinerary and the system spits out a number. It says, Ashutosh, your total travel dollar budget for this trip is, I don't know, $10,000. At that point in time, your entire process, expense reports, is done in the sense that if you want to book a ticket, you book it wherever you want. You don't have to use a certain agency. You can book it on Google or whatever it is. Just use your corporate credit card, right? If you want to stay in London, you can choose whatever hotel you want to use as long as it's within the budget, and the same for all of their expenses. All of those transactions get swept in by those credit card receipts, data rather, and it basically, eliminates the needs to create a travel expense report. But the best part is you don't have any back office. You don't have any need to do travel and expense report formatting. You don't have any procurement people to, do deals with travel agencies. And data has shown that when you empower employees to make their own decisions, they save 15 to 35% of the company's budget. So that's an example of using technology and processes to reimagine the way operations are done.
How amazing. Thank you. And what are some of the common challenges your clients approach you with when it comes to digital transformation in shared services?
So I think the biggest challenge for most organizations is that, as you well know, Ashutosh, 70% of all digital transformations fail to achieve their objectives, which is actually a sad statistic, given that this is a $1.7 trillion industry in the globe, and it's also a very important industry. It is behind all of the change that we see around us. And so, that's probably the number one issue, where companies want to drive some change, either in their product portfolio or their internal operations. And they feel like they either don't have the capability or they have a record internally of having missed, their own goals. Now, part of this is certainly related to technology, right? How technology gets implemented. But, Ashutosh, as you probably know, as well as I do, the largest causes of failure have nothing to do with technology. It is all about change management. So that's a lot of the work that I do.
Very interesting. And since you spoke about technology, I'd love to get your perspective on how do you see emerging technologies like AI, blockchain, IoT, and so many others affecting shared services?
Oh, AI, blockchain, and all of those emerging technologies are at the heart of what's happening to internal business operations, and that's really, the focus of the newly released book, as in last month, on revolutionizing business operations. See, the fact of the matter is that at the end of the day, shared services, back office services, whether it is, HR related transactional stuff, or, accounting, or supply chain, planning and execution, these are just pieces of data transactions, right? And as artificial intelligence or blockchain start to become more and more capable, you have the opportunity to reimagine these. So, I'll give you one example. Let's take something as simple as payroll, right? Every company needs to have some kind of payroll operations, and you can, improve it and automate it and, make it more accurate and low cost to a certain extent. But at some point in time, you have to ask yourself, you know, isn't all types of payments, whether it is payroll or accounts payable or discounts that you pay to your customers, like in the case of Procter and Gamble, it might be a Walmart, aren't those just payments? You know, why do we kind of think of them as belonging to finance versus HR versus sales in my example, right? And if you kind of think of them as payments, then, could you use technology such as, blockchain to have immutable records so that there are no disputes? Could you not use artificial intelligence to take a dispute? So let's say P&G, paid for a certain amount to one of its suppliers, and then the supplier says, well, we never got all of the payment that we expected. You open up a dispute. Using AI, you could figure out using data in real time whether that dispute was valid or not. So these are the kind of things that are completely reimagining internal operations.
Incredible. And when you talk about Inixia being a global standards and certification body, what is the kind of standardization and certification this 13.1 trillion business need?
So the fact of the matter is that as I was saying, shared services or global business services, within its really short span of existence as an industry, literally 40 years, has gone from being the back office of the back office. I mean, you will recall this from your own days of running business operations in different or companies rather in different industries. That when it comes to things like closing the books, finance or payroll, you had somebody in a function somewhere, probably in a basement, that ran the transactions, right? And your job as the CEO or the functional or the business unit leader was to say, hey, this is what I need, just get it done, cheaply, well, so on and so forth. So the evolution of shared services was take transactional work and do it at low cost. Today, global business services has been identified as the #1 enabler for boards of directors to transform their companies.
Wow.
Right. So as a global business services executive, right? So, the work that, my co-author Filippo and I did at Procter and Gamble in running shared services, global business services, you really have to transform yourself, because the skills that it took to run payroll or closing the books cheaply are not the same skills that you need for transforming the operations of the company, a la McKinsey. The first skill set of running back office is either cheap labor or business process outsourcing. The second, the latter skill set of transformation, is a McKinsey-like skill set, right? And those are very, very different skill sets. And so a lot of the work that we do at Inixia is to help companies assess, what is their level of maturity? Are they closer to being a back office, in Gurgaon, TCS type of a factory, as opposed to a, Madison Avenue, sorry, McKinsey skill set, and then what are the various steps and stages by which they can, achieve that transformation. So that's a lot of work we do.
Very interesting. So one more question relating to shared services, and then I want to move to your book. What, in your view, are some of the potential risks or challenges businesses should be aware of when they move to shared services?
So again, I think that's a very perceptive question, because there is a statistic that when organizations move towards shared services within the first couple of years or so, 2/3 of those transitions and transformations fail.
Mhm.
And there are primarily three reasons, right? When you move towards shared services, essentially what you're doing is, you are sweeping similar work, right? So payroll being done for one country with another one, or in one department versus another one. And then you're saying, okay, let's sweep it all together and do it at scale, right? That can fail because, reason number one is more often than not, this is a loss of control for the existing organization, right? So I
Right.
used to be the HR manager of, let's say a particular country. Now you have this new entity that's taken my work, payroll. They don't even know it. I've spent a lifetime being good at it. And how can you assure me that you're going to do this better than me, right? So that's change resistance. That's, change in control. So you have to be very good at understanding and appreciating and counteracting that.
Right.
The second reason why it fails is because a lot of times the people that become part of the new shared services organizations, they don't really come from an industry of transformation. They come from either finance or HR. So they know how to run payroll. They don't really have the same skill set, like I was saying, of a McKinsey or whatever to drive transformation.
Yeah.
So that's quite a big lift to transform their own skill sets, right? So that's the second reason why a lot of these things fail. The third is because, the industry is young, the industry of shared services. So many people basically misunderstand their job. They think their job is to deliver cost savings through cheap labor, whereas in reality, that was our grandfather's shared services, so to speak, or 40 years ago.
Right.
Today, I think it's a totally different entity. So these are the three primary reasons.
Amazing. Thank you. So, Tony, let's move to your book, Revolutionizing Business Operations. Tell me about your book and your hypothesis when you wrote it.
So when Filippo and I wrote this book, one of the things what we wanted to do was to take all of our experiences at Procter and Gamble and try and see if we could, put some of those models into the open market, the open ecosystem, if you will. Because around COVID, Filippo and I were exchanging notes that a lot of the work that we did individually happened to be, as we were being called in by the big four consultancies, as they were trying to figure out, how to get practical advice and experience to these companies that wanted to transform their operations. So, we were essentially the consultants to the consultancies. And one of the things that Filippo and I thought was, at this stage in our life, we're really not looking for, either running an organization or the next source of revenue. What we probably ought to be doing is taking some of these, experiences and models and putting it out there as consumable practices so that anybody could access them. And so that was really a lot of the motivation for us to say, yeah, perhaps we should take a crack at writing a book and putting it out there.
How amazing. And, Tony, you focus on 3 drivers of change in your book. Tell me about these and help me understand these with an example.
Yes. So, so the hypothesis of the book is that, look, most companies think of back office operations, like finance or HR or IT or supply chain as the cost of doing business. So, if I'm running a retail business, I still need to find a way to, cheaply and efficiently and effectively process orders and pay people and, stuff like that, right? The book's hypothesis is that, look, if you approach this as the price of doing business, you are missing on 30% of your potential Wall Street value generation. Studies by McKinsey have shown that companies that actually have really strong operating models and internal business operations, deliver a 30% extra valuation, right, in terms of stock price to their peers. Okay. So then the question becomes, okay, how can we turn what we've historically thought of as the price of business, of doing business, to becoming a competitive advantage? And that's where we say you have to run your internal operations, like finance or IT, as if they were product organizations, not as if they were bureaucracies. So, when I was a CIO a long time ago, the role of the CIO was governance and standard. It's like, oh, you want to buy that PC? No, you're not allowed. You want that software? You're not allowed, right? Bring it all to me.
Yeah.
That's a bureaucratic model, right? As opposed to, if I was an internal supplier within the company, I had to earn the right to exist every day, right? I had to think in terms of maybe the people that are suppliers are my competition. Maybe the CIO of another company who is delivering better service than I do, that's my competition. So it's a mindset change. So to drive that type of mindset, you really get into those three drivers that you're talking about. The first is what we call an open market model, right? So instead of organizing your finance or IT as if it was a bureaucracy, you organize it, including being very clear about the unit price of every service that you deliver inside the company, giving your business partners the choice of which of those products they want to buy. Of course, you still play a governance role. So, you still say, you have to use, these chart of accounts and finance or this technology, but you don't stop there for all of the other services you say. So that's one. The second is unified accountability. If you take any particular work process in a company, let's say order to cash, everything from order processing to then, the collecting the money, right? The fact of the matter is these typically belong to different functions, right? Ordering is sales, and then, cash is finance. As you do end-to-end process, typically people are becoming really good at streamlining the processes, but they're not good at having one accountable person across these.
Right.
So we recommend that you essentially set up unified accountability for end-to-end outcomes, right? And then the third driver is called the dynamic operating engine, which is you need an operating model. You need like an engine that essentially translates all of these ideas that I just talked about into day-to-day activities, day-to-day actions, right? Pretty much the same way that, you might have a Six Sigma or, the Toyota, way to essentially become activities in an organization. So those are the three drivers. And, the best example I could give you of some of this is kind of going back to the example I had given about reinventing travel and expense reports, right? If you had a person who thought of themselves as, my job is to make sure that I have the best competitive travel and expense, product, then you would not stop at running this cheaper, better, faster. You would basically say, I also want to see disruptive innovation, just like any other product manager would. And then you start to say, oh, wait a minute, I can treat this like a data product instead of a transactional product. And I reinvent it, right? So this is how you bring it to life.
Amazing, amazing. So Tony, I have time for one more question for you. And this question is for the thousands of people who will listen to and watch our conversation. You reached to the very top. What would you say are three lessons that you would want a lot of our young viewers and listeners to take away from your life's journey as a professional?
Ashutosh, I'm going to take you as an example of the first one.
Okay.
For our listeners, just before the recording, I was remarking to Ashutosh that as I looked into your background, Ashutosh, what struck me was that, you are a constant learner and a reinventor. And I think that's what it takes, right? if you really want to reach senior levels or, whatever the top of your profession is, you have to reinvent yourself constantly, right? It's uncomfortable, it's difficult, it is hard, you fail. But if you're not changing, then, according to Darwin, you're not necessarily going to be the ones that
Absolutely.
survive, right?
Correct.
So that's one. The second I would say is that, don't really look for your leaders and your managers to always tell you what to do, right? The difference between being a leader and being a follower is that, you're not really looking for orders. You're looking for context. You're looking for, directions. And then you're bringing together your own capabilities to go back and recommend perhaps how things should be done, right? So that's the second thing I would say. The third thing I would say is that you have got to be willing and open to opportunities when they are given to you, right? Opportunity always knocks. In my case, I've had to move along with my family over a career of 27 years at P&G about 13 times across different countries and cities, right? Each of them was a change. Some of them were more painful than others.
Correct.
But then you also have to be open to opportunities when they are given.
Well said. And Tony, on that note, and your three amazing lessons, be a constant learner and reinventor. Second, you said was don't wait to be told what to do. And the third one was be open to opportunities and grab them whenever they present themselves to you. Thank you so much for speaking to me about your own amazing journey. Thank you for speaking to me at such length about the shared services business and the amazing things that you're doing with your companies, Inixia and Transformant. Thank you also for speaking to me about your book, Revolutionizing Business Operations. Thank you again and good luck.
Oh, it's been my real pleasure and honor, Ashutosh. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.